whatever one does, his vis-a-vis tends to repeat. We call it reciprocity. We don't know what the word reciprocity means, actually. We don't know where it comes from. I mean, it's a real mystery. Some people think that it comes from the motion of the tide, back and forth. But whatever I do to you, you reciprocate. I offer my hand, you take it, we shake hands. But if you don't take my hand, and if you put your hand behind your back, I will also put my hand behind my back. In other words, I will reciprocate a friendly action, you will reciprocate it too. But if there's no good reciprocity, there will immediately be a bad one, which takes over. And this is what I think the specialists of human relations have not noticed enough, that far from lacking reciprocity, we cannot get out of it. But it's very easy to shift from good reciprocity to bad reciprocity, and terribly difficult to shift from bad reciprocity to good reciprocity. Because once we are in bad reciprocity, we keep turning around the room like you did, faster and faster, and it becomes more and more violent. It's very easy to shift to that. But to stop, I noticed you needed a third party. You needed an umpire, someone to arbitrate between you, And I think the problem of mankind is really precisely that whichever reciprocity we have, we are not going to be able to get out of it. It'll be a vicious circle into which things will always get worse and worse, and we don't really know why, anyway, because even good reciprocity, and this was one of the meaning of, can become bad by force of repetition, or, lose its appeal. But it seems to me that much of the contemporary theater studies that sort of thing, So what is the cause of that? And I think the cause of that is that we are very different from animals in that respect, I think that reciprocity begins with a glance. We look at each other. And this is a very striking thing, in my view, when you look at, animals fighting on TV, even the two goats that hit precisely the center of the forehead and so forth, they don't look at each other. They don't look at each other before the fight, during the fight, or after the fight. There is a total lack of glance. This is so true that Kipling had a special theory, which was typical Kipling. He was a genius. But in the Jungle Book, there is that story that animals cannot stand the glance of man, which is human superiority. It's not true. If you look a cat in the eyes too long, the cat will be bored, will go to sleep. But men will never go to sleep. They'll rise to the challenge, and they'll fight. I think it is the good and the bad of man, It's inescapable. We are terribly mimetic, and being mimetic, inevitably, we are open to conflict. But it shouldn't be viewed, I don't think the mimetic theory views it only as a negative thing, It's also a positive thing. We have relations. Animals don't have relations. Well, today, people talk about animal culture and that sort of thing, but they always have relations, which is like enslavement. When they have these fights about dominance, that's the way the ethologists call it, and these fights never lead to death. Because the defeated animal offers the defeated wolf, for instance, his throat to the victor. And out of this, a relationship is born which we call dominance. But dominance means that the victorious animal will always choose first. And the dominated animal can only choose what the other one doesn't choose. That's the relationship of dominance, which is the building block, really, of what ethologists call animal society. But as far as we know, it doesn't go any further than that. It doesn't have much diversity. If this is the way animal societies are born, you know, in the type of competition that you have for food, sex, and so forth, instead of moving to death, it moves to dominance. In human beings, if you had the same thing, they would kill each other. We know that. Human beings are the only kind of creatures, I say creatures in order to find a word that includes both human beings and, you know, I'm talking like a Darwinian ethologist here. If we allowed for that, we know very well what would happen. We would get into what we call vengeance. What is vengeance? Vengeance is doing what the other guy does. Always the same thing, but it's the ultimate in bad reciprocity that I defined just before. The ultimate in bad reciprocity is to stop it by killing the opponent. And all men know how to do that, and only men do that, because animals don't have intraspecific murder. So, you know, when people say, oh, humans are violent and so forth, animals are much less violent, they are right. They are perfectly right. If we didn't have culture in the human sense, there would be no humanity. Humanity would have destroyed itself at birth. When the mimetic power rose in the relationship between animals, and we know that it rises, and we know it today scientifically through the mirror neurons. The higher you get, the more mirror neurons you have, and the more mirror neurons you have with men, the more you do the same thing. But this doing the same thing includes enough violence to kill. And we call it vengeance. We don't even know if vengeance is an institution, a custom, or instinct. We don't have any name, you know, for the thing which is probably most distinctive of human being. The human species is the only one which threatens its own existence from birth. We should be immensely aware of this now, because we do it with weapons that are so efficient that it's coming back to us at an incredible speed right this moment, you know. It's the main event of the 20th and 21st century, that man can destroy himself. That man, in other words, is an apocalyptic creature, like the Bible says, and no other religion does, you know. That should, if there are people on Mars who are watching us, they must be wondering why, even though we have scriptures that talk about the destruction of man by himself, we pay absolutely no attention to it now. We stopped paying attention to it when it became literally possible every day. Because in churches, we've stopped preaching eschatology and the end of times at the very moment when we became able to make it happen, you know. This, to me, is evidence that the Bible is not a religion like the other ones, that it knows about the origin and the end of man, things that are incomparable and that cannot be compared with any other religion. And it's linked to that mimetic power, because obviously fighting is an escalation, you know. We use the word escalation a lot today, but we should use it first for children fighting. It begins with a few words, you know, then there are more blows and so forth, and after that they try to do all the harm they can do to one another. Why? because they are both doing the same thing, repeating, whatever you do to me, I'm going to do to you. If you treat me well, I will treat you well. But it's never the good aspect of it which dominates. Because it's so easy to imagine that aggression comes from the other. We insist on defining violence as aggression. And we are violent in the very doing of that. If violence, why do we want to define violence as aggression? Because we never feel aggressive ourselves. And we are not. We are mimetic. We imitate the aggression of the guy in front of us. Or at least we make him feel that we understand his aggressive intent. We don't feel aggressive at all, but we show him we understand he's aggressive. And he interprets that as our aggression, and vice versa, and so forth. The interpretation is always the same. Therefore, we always are in a situation where we need something between us to arbitrate. And the fundamental human situation is 3, not 2, you know. As long as it is 2, it is totally destructive. And of course, we talk only about love, but we practice only violence as we talk of love. That's why the mimetic theory is a critical theory. By critical, it means it suspects. You know, the modern world is essentially critical. And it's very easy to talk a good game of nonviolence. All cultures know that, how to do that. They do it perfectly well, but they all fight and fight each other. Therefore, we have to find something better. You see what I mean? And there have been, one could say, 3 great attempts to solve the problem in the modern world. I would say one is Marx, who says it's the economic goods that we cannot divide, we cannot share, and that's why we fight. The second one is Freud, who said, no, it's really sexual objects that we cannot share, and that's the real problem. And the third one is Nietzsche, who said a little bit the same thing in a more abstract way, who said it's power that we cannot share. And we have to fight. Nietzsche, in a way, understood less than the other two, because the other two took the need for peace for granted, and they were right. Whereas Nietzsche said, eternal war is fine with me. That's why Hitler was so dangerous, because he was the first great statesman to be Nietzschean and say war is our field and our domain, and let's do it. And we found that it was not only dreadful horror, but also a direct threat to all existing creatures on the earth. And we are at this stage. Well, the mimetic theory is a third attempt, and it's trying to think in mimetic terms, in terms of what human relations really are, to be as virulent and dangerous as they are. Do we really understand that? Without the mimetic theory is my question. Are human relations, you know, something which can be described purely rationally, as Enlightenment humanism believed, that you could do away with religion completely, and then you could establish the perfect society on a purely rational basis? I think that our time is very important because it's beginning to realize it cannot be. It's not possible, you know. So the question is, can the mimetic theory make a contribution? That's what we are trying to find out.
According to Paul, the principalities and powers
Are in charge of the world, I would say. You would agree with this. And they run the show. And Paul's attitude is, or seems to be, quite ambivalent toward them. They are opposed to Christ, even though they are really dominated by him. But Christ does not make his power over them, his superpower,
over them visible in history. They are in charge, you know. And, you know, human beings have a culture, and human beings have a religious and political structure, you know, which is there, and the principalities and power in Paul designate that fundamentally. And Paul's attitude toward them is that they are still in charge, and that therefore Christians must obey them, must be good subjects of the kingdom of the world such as it is today, which really means the Roman Empire. Many people think that the expression principalities of power has been invented in a way not to use any word that would designate the Roman Empire too visibly and specifically. I don't know if you agree with that, but it's a secondary question. And the principalities and powers, it's difficult when you read Paul. At times they seem to be very bad. But they will be destroyed only at the end of the world when Christ gets in charge. So I think that the mimetic theory has things to say about the principalities and powers which are not immediately visible. There is a mirror effect between Christ and the principalities and powers, you know, which in a way I think modern anthropology reflects by telling us that most myths are really the same stories as the Gospels, fundamentally. You have a big crisis in the community, and then you have someone who is seen as responsible for that crisis, who's committed a big crime in myth, and is justly punished for it, and that crisis is over. Oedipus, for instance, has committed parricide and incest. And if you punish him, you will put an end to the plague which has invaded Thebes, because Thebes has never punished Oedipus, but done just the opposite, made him his king. You see what I mean? Her king. In the Gospels, you have a big crisis because the world is dominated. The little Jewish kingdom is slowly destroyed by the Romans who are there occupying the thing. And then, in a way, the Gospels represent the death of Jesus as some kind of attempt at finding a scapegoat that would solve the solution. And in a sense, that's the only reason for the crucifixion, according to the Gospels. Therefore, anthropologists are completely right when they say myth, Gospels, fundamentally, same structure, same story. You see? Christians have rejected that view very much because they are terribly scared of it, because they fear it's the old modern unbelief of saying the gospel is a myth. Isn't it? It is, of course. It doesn't mean that Christians should reject that view. It means that they should agree with it even more. They shouldn't go against common sense. Christianity is much more commonsensical, as well as Judaism, as people realize. There is a huge difference that you see immediately if you understand what a scapegoat process is, and that you will see if you read with simple enough eyes the Gospels versus a myth. The similarities are just defined, are there. They are unquestionable. They are so striking that to deny them is to go against common sense, you know.
So today, in a way, it's modern common sense that is anti-religious. They are only myths. Look, they are all the same. There is always the death of a hero there who is accused of something. And they don't see that difference, which is so huge. You see, so simple. And the truth is that the difference between myth and the Gospels is revealed by the Gospels, but we don't want to look at it. And the Christians, the religious people, are terribly bad anthropologists, whereas the atheists are a little better, just a little better, but not very good either. You see, in order to be a good anthropologist, what do you have to say and to see? Is that the myth, they have all something in common, which is that they read that story from the point of view of the mob. The victim is guilty. Oedipus has committed parricide and incest. Even Freud believes in it. We live in a mob. Freud denounces himself the mythical aspect of his psychoanalysis in the sense that he shows us it's a myth. To believe in the parricide and incest is to believe in the Oedipus myth. And Freud believes in it, whereas Christianity doesn't. Christianity and Judaism before, which is terribly important, they all interpret the story from the point of view of the victim. The victim is innocent and not guilty. It's not just friendship for Jesus or friendship for Joseph or friendship for Job that you give a voice to the victim in the Bible. It's to tell the truth. It's the mob that is wrong. It's the crowd. It's the people who are wrong. That's why Christianity is hated in our world. Because far from being, you know, the popular religion and so forth, it's the anti-popular religion. It denounces what the crowd believes. The crowd always believes in the guilt of the victim. The Bible and the Gospels never. And look around, look in the landscape. You'd never have that problematic, that mythical problematic again. It's never rectified anywhere except in a few books of the Bible and in the Gospels. Therefore, the few books of the Bible and the Gospels are inseparable. They are the only books which denounce religion in the normal human sense. The problem, of course, with all religions, including Christianity, is that it has become a religion in the normal human sense. And in the process, it has been unfaithful to itself and deserves some of the strictures. So the people, in a way, the Christians feel that, and they are afraid of anthropology. But it's a total reversal of viewpoint there. But if you start thinking about it very hard, you will see that it's a purely scientific theory. It's obvious that some people do commit incest, others parricide. But parricide and incest at the same time, that's too much. No. That's unbelievable. It's obviously a false accusation. And Freud was completely wrong when he thought that it was a unique insight of the Oedipus. It's all over the place in the Pacific Ocean, in the Americas, and so forth. It's the most vulgar mythical story. Vulgar in the etymological sense. It's a mob story. When you have an enemy in a bar and you're fighting, you say insults that are equivalent to the Oedipus myth. Sophocles knew that when he wrote Oedipus the King. He had Oedipus and Tiresias fight that fight from which the myth is born. And at the end of the scene, they accuse each other, both of them, of parricide and incest. But we believe only one, and we call it culture. We believe only one is guilty. But as long as we don't realize all are innocent of that murder, you know, and the victim, not all are guilty of that murder, and the victim alone is innocent, you know, we don't understand myth. and we don't understand the Gospels that overturn myth 100%. But I see people are interdits, as we say in French, you know. It's just too paradoxical. But Christianity is immensely paradoxical. That's what Kierkegaard understood, but he never could formulate that business about anthropology, archaic anthropology, and the anti-mythical aspect of the Bible and Gospels. Human culture lives in a permanent lie until it reaches that truth, that the lie is to make the victim guilty, to make the victim different. Culture is difference. As long as we don't have difference, we are not happy. And ultimately, we turn. So now we've reached the extreme, and we see that the Gospels are responsible. Today, the great fashion is to see that religion is responsible for violence in the world. That's what you hear on TV every day. And the ultimate scapegoat should be religion, because the sense of religion is precisely that. It's always the scapegoating, you know. Now, people don't understand what I'm talking about because they don't understand the most fundamental thing about scapegoating. When people come and tell me, oh, I understand fully your story, your business, you know, you cannot believe how scapegoated I am. I said, go away, this is everybody's story. I want to hear the story which is nobody's story. And it's a story of Peter. When he realizes he's betrayed Jesus, he realizes that the scapegoater is he, and that Jesus is a scapegoat. And Paul, Peter is the first conversion in the Gospels, and Paul is the last one. But Paul, contrary to what people realize, it's exactly the same story as Peter. What does he hear? Peter sees it in Luke, at least in the eyes of Jesus, you know, and Jesus has announced the truth to him before. So what is essential about Peter's denial is his awareness that he has betrayed. We all betray without realizing it. I mean, no century has been a century of apostasy as ours, but it doesn't realize it's apostate, essentially. You see? And what is the question that Paul hears? Why do you persecute me?